Hey guys, and welcome back to another React video. Today we have Bad Takes and Space Bushido from Buzzcut Psycho. It's been a while since I did a React video, but I've just been, enjoying the game really. But I've waited for this video to kind of cook, and it has, and now I think it's ready to react to and consume. I like to give like these guys when they make these videos a few days, for them to capture as much of their audience and, get as many views as they're likely going to get. Because for those who don't know, like kind of after the 3-day mark is when the views like really start to slow down on a video. So I just find it courteous to wait a little while. But and I want to be clear about this, I've been a big fan of Buzzcut's content, and I'll tell you guys why. I think his content is very, very polarizing to the wealth of feedback that I'm surrounded with. You guys know my YouTube channel by now, or the type of player I am. I'm sweaty, elite, dogfighting, fast-paced combat, right? Very much into the PvP scene. He's very polarizing that in regards to slow, multi-crew, heavy ship gameplay. And so a lot of his feedback is standing up for those loops that were promised to be included in master modes. So I find his content to be extremely admirable in reality, and I think it's also hilarious because he's got a good sense of humor among his videos. But he is sticking up for you guys in regards to multi-crew and heavy ship gameplay. Like, he really is. There is nobody else, not one other content creator, and I don't want to discredit people giving feedback on Spectrum, etc., but he's making the videos that are looking out for the multi-crew heavy ship feedback. And look, I'll be completely honest, because that's what I want to be too. When I am in Master Mode's Free Fly and Master Mode Squadron Battle, doing the huge amount of testing and feedback providing as I am, the second most common content creator I see in there is Buzzcut. Buzzcut is putting multiple hours, sometimes more, a day into the feedback for master modes. Like, he is in there a lot, guys. And I'm telling you, like, if he's number 2 in there for how often he's in there, number 3 is so much less. So much less. So, it's commendable. He's in there putting in the work, trying to get these gameplay loops to be looked after. And as we saw in the last video that I reacted to of his, the multi-crew turret experience and the heavy ship experience are not in a good place, and they need some bug fixes. Good news is, though, after I made that react, some of my guys discovered some misaligning when it comes to the turret gameplay. So they spun up some ICs, and I'm hoping that there's some buffs coming for the multi-crew experience to that. So awesome to the guys in the Shadow Moses Discord for discovering that, and then going through the right channels to get the ICs created and looked at. So really cool. But yeah, I'm a big fan of how polarizing his content is to the usual Mastermode's feedback. So with that being said, let's get into it, yeah? Gosh, we're at 4 minutes. I haven't even started yet. Oh, God. I'll try not to be too long.
Master modes are essential and good as a concept for the product as a whole.
Yep.
That doesn't mean it is perfect. It hasn't been perfect, but it was better at one point.
It's so important to clarify that, right? Like, people aren't realizing that often a lot of the time that people are giving master modes good feedback as opposed to bad feedback, it's because they're understanding that the master modes is the framework, guys. It's the starting point. So like, when I say or describe myself as being positive about master modes, it's because it's the framework, it's the beginnings, right? I love that the speeds have come down to allow these fights to happen in realistic distances. And I'm, really glad that squadron battles, which just simulates big fights, is having as much success as it is. But I'm also realistic that the 1v1 experience needs to definitely get more complicated. The ceiling needs to probably come up. The skill ceiling needs to come up, a decent amount. But this is like a great starting point because now the mechanics make sense. So understand, like I'm not just I don't want to use that wording, but with my positive feedback, come just understand that it is about the framework. I think we're in a good position to launch from when it comes to master modes. Understand too, like we have stealth gameplay to be built upon this. We have electronic warfare that will stem from this. We have armor, which has been the promised Holy Land for 6 years while I've backed this game. We have multi-crew actually, hopefully, existing in a meaningful way. Capital ships are on the horizon. Torpedo and missile gameplay reworks. Computer hacking, there's so much to this. So this is a launch platform, and I think it's in a great shape. So understand that, that's what my feedback, and I think a lot of people's positive feedback is for master modes. Because people almost make it sound like it's uncool to enjoy up master modes. I like the framework. That's what it is. And I am still wishing it gets pushed, towards a higher skill ceiling, towards a smoother flight experience, etc., etc. And it's got a long way to go. But it's great where it is right now. And keep building. Keep building on top of it, I think. And I think, people kind of assume that when someone has positive feedback towards master modes, it's like, they think it's great. They think it's finished. Not at all. That ain't the case.
I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. So let's examine some of the common talking points people parrot to disparage the system. And I assure you, most of the people parroting these talking points didn't come up with them on their own. But before I begin, I want to stress that this video and its talking points are aimed purely at the team fight elements of the game.
Ooh.
None of what I am saying pertains in any way, shape, or form to 1v1 duels.
Dude, this is so important because a lot of people might, make this huge Lord of the Rings paragraph and break down physics meets gameplay meets fun meets CIG's systems in the game, right? And it's paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, and then you don't even understand what that feedback is relative to. Are they referring to a squad battle? Are they referring to two archetypes interacting? Are they referring to a face-to-face duel? Because each of those points I just mentioned are such drastically different aspects of the flight model. A 1v1 duel right now, when the archetypes interact, like heavy versus light and stuff, they're actually kind of interesting. I do think that they need a little bit more work, but it's intriguing. They're interesting. They're fun. They're in a better place than, for example, mirror matches. Because that's, I think, is a lot of the issue with the 1v1 stuff, is some of the characteristics of these fighters, when they go up against their twin, the geometry kind of just breaks. Like nothing happens. It's a bit of a stalemate, face-to-face stalemate. That's what the case is with the Gladius. Everybody finds in the Gladius mirror match that they're kind of just stagnant. They can't push up on each other. They can't gain position on each other because they have the identical characteristics, and it's not rewarding aggression. And it's the same case for the Hornet and Vanguard. But then when you get the different archetypes interacting with each other, then you start to see the difference in the characteristics applied to each other, and it gets more interesting. Definitely room for improvement in all aspects there, but 1v1, the flight model gets pushed to its limits. In squadron battle or the group setting, so groups on groups, you don't see a lot of that. It's kind of hidden away because there's so much going on. There's multiple opponents, stuff like that. So it's extremely important to be very specific with where your feedback is directed to and came from. You know, was you in this sort of archetype? Were you with the group? Were you up against these type of archetypes? Were you in atmosphere or were you in space? You know, stuff like this, because it just makes it easier to digest people's feedback, because there's so much feedback right now. It gets drowned out by the sheer amount. So when you're very specific, it's very useful and easier to decipher.
Which is one of the issues Master Mose aims to address. I also strongly recommend that you head over to Virgil's channel and watch his videos regarding prominent videos related to the subject of Master Mose. His insight is quite valuable and worth listening to.
Gang.
I'll include the link in the description below.
Hell yeah. Haha. That's cool. I'm blushing.
This is the most common complaint you will encounter, and why I want to address it first.
That was very
It comes
nice.
in two parts. The first part is from a gameplay standpoint. Players will say, the speeds are fine in live, it feels so much better. But they are, of course, wrong, and are instead parroting talking points from their favorite influencers. The reality is that with the current speeds in PU, you are unable to get into any real fights.
It's true.
No battle is a commitment.
It's
No
true.
combat can happen unless both sides agree not to disengage into quantum. No proper team fights can happen. There is simply too much speed. So,
and it's funny because this combat, like better combat does exist in live, but it has to be in a tight atmosphere planet like Microtech. And you know why it works at Microtech? Because Microtech's really strict and tight atmosphere, heavy atmosphere, simulates master modes, guys, because the speed ceilings are drastically lower. So be careful when you ask for higher speed ceilings, because then you're asking for distance, you're removing terrain, dodging around asteroids and stations out of the equation in favor of distance. And some people disguise that debate with speed, and they don't realize that speed is relative to a fight, right? It's relative to the weapons, it's relative to the size of the ships, to the location that we're at, the asteroids in the area, the stations in the area. It's all relative to that. So just understand that when you're complaining about the feeling of speed, imagine it's like you're driving on a highway, right? And you're going the speed limit. If there is 2 grass fields on either side of the road as you're driving down, you don't feel like you're going fast. But then you throw trees in that equation where they're whizzing past. Now you're starting to feel like you're driving at really high speeds. So just understand that it's very much an illusion. And to create a sense of speed that I think people are craving for, I think that the answer could be accelerations rather than just increasing the speed limit. It could also mean, slowing weapon speeds or increasing weapon speeds, creating better geometry, ways to evade, stuff like that. But I don't think it's just increase the ceiling. I think that sets us on a really scary path to going right back to needing master modes again to arrest those speeds. So just be, cautious or understanding of exactly what people are asking for and what the consequences are of raising speeds. Just be understanding of that, right? I think that I can relate to both sides of the argument here. I absolutely can. But I think that we can restore the feeling of speed by creating a gradual flight inside of the combat bubble or the ship's characteristics in regards to speed limits. I think that we can create the feeling, the sensation of speed that we're missing from live inside of those bubbles by, like a more gradual progression from unboosted to boosted, stuff like this. Maybe changing the shape of what these ceilings look like. You've heard of the egg, for example, the sphere, the bubble. You can change these shapes into really interesting shapes to create better geometry gameplay. But just understand, increasing the speed limits, it sets us on a scary path, I think. But we got to keep going with this video. I'm hijacking it. I'm sorry. I've got to stop doing this.
You'd have to come
it's
to
the passion, boys, I swear.
Gentlemanly agreement that you would all stay at SCM and
you
fight
do.
to death.
And you can never get that agreement to happen because all the PvP orgs, for the most part, dislike each other. And then the other orgs are usually food because they haven't learned the flight model. So, yeah, he's right. You have to nod head. You have to agree.
Now, how
it's true.
stupid
It just
does
is.
that sound?
Yep.
If you have an above room temperature IQ, you may realize by now that that isn't how the game works. The second thing that they say is that it feels like
it's
they're
a game
moving
of
too
piracy
slowly
and stuff, right?
and things should be faster. That it isn't realistic, and that space has no drag, among various things. And some of it is true. You could, in theory, move a lot faster in space. You would also not feel or experience drag. So where do these people propose the speed ends? The space shuttle in 1981 could go as fast as 17,500 miles per hour, or, in Star Citizen terms, 7,822 meters a second. Surely something in the Star Citizen universe could go much faster, right? It could. And I have two answers to that argument. The first is, so what? Who cares? What does it matter? The second and more polite answer is that CIG has always written down and provided in-universe lore reasons for this limitation. All the way back in 2018, John Pritchett, former senior physics programmer for CIG, made a...
You want to know something really interesting? I don't know if Buzzcut's aware, but I actually have a podcast on this channel, guys, called Stand Deep Dive Valkyrie on my channel. Feel free to go back to it if you haven't. It, in my eyes, is the best podcast that I've ever been on, the best podcast I've ever seen, like in regards to Star Citizen. And guess who we had on it? Zerain, John Pritchett, who is a good friend of mine. We still talk, a very cool guy. And he was ex-CIG, so this is kind of when his flight model was argued as being really, really good. He then was no longer with the company for reasons I don't want to talk about, but he, was out of there. They replaced his flight model, and I tell you what, it was such a step backwards. Like, it was 2 miles backwards from what we had before that. So again, this guy was hailed as having the best flight models this game has seen in the past. You hear people talk about the 2.6, the 1. Whatever, the 3.4, 3.3. These flight models, they were all his. And this guy's a very cool guy. I know he's working on another space game at the moment, but we did a big, huge podcast with him that is just rotting away on my YouTube channel. It's called Stand Deep Dive Valkyrie. Check it out. This guy's a cool guy. He gets on there, he explains everything, explains how he worked at CIG, what his kind of theory was to developing the flight model, how easy it would have been to change some flight characteristics and stuff. It was very good. I recommend Buzz. Check it out, man. There's so much there. And people, for the large part, are unaware of that podcast existing. I'll actually link it in the description. Yeah, I'll link it in the description.
Thread linking to a document he wrote that explains the intelligent flight control system.
This guy, and John Pritchett was so passionate. Very much similar to Yogi, very active in the community. Really wanted to look after guys. I heard that he was working overtime to fix issues, that players were bringing up with the game and stuff. I heard nothing but really great things about him in regards to that. So John Pritchett was a good, had a huge, great impact on Star Citizen. And even to this day, we compare everything we have to his previous work. So, can't commend him enough.
Or IFCS. To the players and its in-universe role. In particular, one part on page 8 is most interesting and very relevant to this. Let me read it off to you. Speed regulation. Because IFCS imposes an artificial limit on the linear velocity of a ship, the speed regulation subsystem will use a limited amount of thrust to generate a corrective deacceleration whenever the ship is exceeding the speed cap for any reason. He also made a mention about atmospheric flight and why it is slower. He writes, every ship has a velocity at which drag forces become too extreme for the structure of the vehicle to withstand. This is most problematic for ships that are designed primarily for spaceflight, where structure is not engineered to withstand the strain of atmospheric forces. It is also worth noting that on page 5 he mentions acceleration, and how if it is too high, it causes stiff and unnatural movements, something we are experiencing in 3.22.1. He writes, if we would allow our ships to switch between 0 and maximum acceleration instantaneously, the motion of our ships would be extremely stiff and unnatural. Therefore, we place a limit on how quickly acceleration can change, and this limit is called jerk. Case closed, end of story. CIG can make the speeds whatever they want, and they have an in-universe lore reason to explain it away. The IFSC imposes an artificial limit on speed and acceleration to prevent damage to the ship and its components, as well as prevent harm from coming to the human body due to the Gs. The SCM nav switch interacts with the IFSC, and the system then reroutes power to the systems necessary to achieve maximum safe speeds that both the pilot and ship can handle. If that answer isn't good enough for you, here's another one. The servers simply cannot handle high distance, especially for a game that is going to feature a lot of PvP in an MMO environment. If you have been playing SC for any amount of time, you know just how bad the desync can get in PvP when 2 or more players are in the same area doing battle.
And it's worth knowing desync is a lot better in master modes because of the speeds. You know, it's absolutely true. Like, you know, the networking, all that, you know, magic stuff that goes behind the scenes, it's a lot better. And you don't find nearly as frequent of an issue as you did in the past, even last patch in live. So is absolutely right. A lot of, I don't know if they are on record saying this, but I do believe that, you know, master modes solves a lot of the technical issues of flying through the engine at those speeds. So yeah, I agree. And it's a massive reason. And you know what? That issue scales. It scales with the size of the ships, right? So in the live flight model, if you're flying a Connie Andromeda, for example, in live, no one's going to complain about hit reg against your ship because you're gigantic. It's the same with the F8. The F8's a large fighter, right? So when you're flying it around, no one complains about the large fighter, even when it's flying at max speed, 1337. But now get into an Archimedes, get into a Fury, get into an Arrow. Now you're starting to see the game break. Now you're starting to see the ugly warts of the networking. You're starting to see the loads that the server is on regards to pressure. You're starting to see bad performance causing frustration in the game. Master modes solves a lot of that, okay? I still am not a big fan of snub fighter mosquito ships because they don't perform that well on the internet, especially at scale, especially under load. Really not a fan of that, but master modes makes it tolerable because in live it isn't. If you fly a snub fighter in live, you know why you're flying the snub fighter, is my point.
No matter the size of the battle, the server simply cannot keep up with the speeds of the legacy flight.
It can't. It's true. He's right. He's just right. Master modes will get boring. I agree with this too, though. You know, like if the master modes remains just the framework, then I do think it has a less of a shelf life. So it does need to get more interesting. I think the skill ceiling needs to get a bit higher. I think the gameplay needs to become more interesting, maybe in the heavier weight classes too, like the medium, the heavy fighter. Multi-crew we can assume will get more fun because of engineering, but yeah, it does. It needs to get more fun, I think. I know I've beaten Buzz to his point, but I feel like I haven't covered that in any of my reacts or master mode videos yet. So apologies, I'm getting excited.
Master modes is too easy, and that ease will cause players to hit a skill ceiling too quickly and eventually get bored. I disagree. Master modes is absolutely easier than the legacy flight model and is much more accessible for players.
Yep.
But it is far from easy. I, myself, will never become an ace fighter pilot. It doesn't interest me. The big ships do. But I feel like if I wanted to learn and improve, I absolutely could become an ace with this new system. And that means the system is working. People are not going to hit a wall and decide that they no longer have anything left to learn and get bored.
I think I disagree a bit here. But do I think that the ceiling to becoming an ace needs to get a lot higher? Not like a huge amount, but I do think it needs to get higher. The gameplay does need to get more interesting. Like if you fly a Hornet every day and do combat every day in a 1v1 group setting, I think you are going to get a bit bored. Now there's some more systems to add more depth to this, like, stealth, electronic warfare missiles, radar, all this jazz, right? It is going to get more interesting inevitably, but I do think the flight component of the game could get more interesting. So, a good example is like if a Hornet is going up against a light fighter, the Hornet's just trying to turret and back up because it doesn't have much other options. You go forward, you're dead. So, like that gameplay itself could be more interesting. There could be more options, more variation. I do think you might be a little wrong here, Buzz, for sure. But, self-admittedly, you haven't played those light fighters. You're not there for it. But I do think it's a bit of a problem. But again, I'm also understanding that it's a framework. I'm expecting it to naturally get more fun anyway. I'm expecting them to build more character and more variation on top of what they've built these archetypes so far. We got more weapon types coming, stuff like that. So I do think it'll get more interesting, but I do also think it needs to get more fun in a flight aspect. I do. That is a very strong point. Yeah, like master modes, flight does need to become more interesting. It does. It actually does.
Not at all. I'd argue, though, that the hook of Star Citizen shouldn't just be mastering the flight model, but rather everything else that makes Star Citizen the MMO game it is trying to be.
Yeah, but like, you still got to look after those guys that are still playing after a year, 2 years, right? Like, look at Battlefield, for example. I understand Battlefield's not an MMO, so it's not a great counterpoint to the point he just made. But Battlefield, has all this variation. You can, go in all these different vehicles, tanks, helicopters, planes, you can pick all these weapons. But notoriously, everybody drops Battlefield after 2 or 3 months. I think Star Citizen's combat is under threat of something like that, and hopefully they can maintain a longer shelf life and keep people interested with things like base rating, legendary armor, rarity and items, stuff like that, But I do think the gameplay needs to be more fun, some more depth. But the middle ground I'd have with Buzz when it comes to this is that it should always be entry level, easier to get into. We don't want the same mistakes of live, but I do want to see some more depth. I do. So yeah.
Multiple roles, professions, organizations, politics, competition, a living, breathing world. That is.
But understand too that like when I say depth, I'm just saying like enjoyment and learning and exploring and variation. I'm not talking about making the game very difficult for everybody. I'm just liking the idea of being able to push and, my learning of flying a ship and mastering of a ship further and further and further, but not to the point it gives me this gigantic advantage over everybody else. It's more so just, the experience, the journey of getting to become an ace. It should be a long one and not a short one. But, it shouldn't translate to, overwhelming amounts of power. No.
Going to be the major hook. Not being the master of a flight model in Arena Commander. People who make this argument are trying to appeal to the concern of longevity, but don't factor in what truly garners longevity in an MMO. I could promise you people haven't been playing EVE for over 20 years now because it has an amazing, detailed, and highly engaging flight model.
It's true. He's got a good point there. Archetypes limits skill.
You see this one a lot. People will say that the archetype system that master modes are promoting will change or force players to play a certain way, that it will prevent players in an Aurora from killing an arrow.
Okay, now we know what he's talking about.
So what? What makes you think that you have any business having a respectable chance of killing a dedicated light fighter in a starter ship? Would the same people who gripe about this extend the same courtesy to the Vulture or the Prospector?
Here's the thing, like when it comes to the isolation of archetypes, archetypes exist in every MMO, every game there is, right? Like you got the Rogue Assassin class, you got the Mage class, the Warrior class, stuff like this, and they all have really high skill ceilings. So yeah, I kind of don't agree. And I actually think the opposite. So I think Buzzcut's right when he's saying that he thinks that that opinion is wrong. Because if every class is the hero class, for example, if there is no archetypes and every ship can do everything and there's a little variation in everything, then that just means that everyone is picking the one best ship. Right. And it's true, you know, like, for example, a lot of people are saying that Master Modes is just going to be Buccaneer dominated. It is. The Buccaneer needs to get wrestled into balance. But if every ship behaves the same for the most part, then a single ship meta will always show its head. And everyone gets good at every ship. So, you know, the ships for the most part will fly the same. You know, mastering one ship is to master most. And I think lowers the overall skill ceiling. But if you've got 40 different ships with 40 different characteristics that can do 40 different things within their own variation bubbles, then I would argue that the skill ceiling is much higher and better. You just don't get to have it all. So I'm a big fan of the archetype system. I am. Because it's scissors, paper, rock. It's strategy. It creates interesting events. It creates counter-picking compositions of the enemy team. It you know, you can hard counter people. It just gets so much more interesting. Theory crafting, stuff like this. How much theory crafting is there in the live flight model? There's none. Pick ship which is most broken, get 20 of your friends in it, and go cause havoc. So I agree with Buzz here, actually.
Do the self-proclaimed PvP elite think that an industrial ship should be a credible threat to their light fighter? Of course not. The same way I do not expect to have a chance against an opponent armed with a rifle when I only have a knife. I do not expect a certain class of ship to be able to credibly threaten another. Ships need character.
You could use the X-Wing versus the Death Star. Like, is the expectation that the X-Wings are supposed to be able to take down the Death Star? And I don't think the other person he's referring to is like meaning that. So I don't want to join in on any bashing there or anything. But it's a similar debate, right?
Ships need roles.
I think here's the thing. I think everyone is right. Okay, like clearly he's talking about Avenger here. And I think Avenger's right. I think Buzzcut is very right too. I think I'm right. I think everybody is right. And the answer is some middle ground between everybody, because that's what Master Modes is supposed to be. It's supposed to encompass all. So it's supposed to be for the sweaty dogfighters that want to PvP. And they need to find a way to coexist with the other archetypes and the other types of players. It's to look after the guys who are wanting to do multi-crew. It's to look after the guys that are wanting to go stealth and use torpedoes to sneak in. It's to look after the pirates and boarding, multi-crew with engineering, capital ship whales that paid for the game we're playing. It's to encompass all. And we can all coexist with each other. But we need to be fair. We all need to be fair in how what we want interacts with what other people want. So the light fighter guys, like me for the record, so I'm on Avengers side with that, is, we need to have the depth, the complexity, the skill ceiling the desire to play this game the long term as we desire. But we also should not be given the ability to take out the Death Star or to solo an Idris or, things like this, to take out an entire squad of 4 or 5 guys We know we don't get to have that anymore. We shouldn't have that anymore. But you know, it should include all. Should include all, and we should all get what we want. And and that's reasonable. I think that's reasonable that we all get what we want. And then we can get there, the promised land.
It blows my mind that people in the SC community can have such unrealistic game design expectations when other games, such as World of Tanks or World of Warships, manage to give each ship class and individual ship within that class a distinct role and identity. Do you not think it would be better for gameplay if every ship in this game, of which there are well over 200 by now, had a style to play or role to fulfill? Some people in this community really need to get their ego in check and think about the bigger picture and try to, for once, consider anything and everything else but themselves. This is a game being made to appeal to many, and not everyone is going to want to fly the Gladius for another 10 years. They have their favorite ships, their favorite designs, and their favorite roles. And they want to not only be viable, but also essential. So, what isn't a DPS race at its core? If I turn a corner and come face to face with an opponent in Star Marine, my objective is to damage him faster than he could damage me. Is that a DPS race? How about when I'm going toe-to-toe with another Constellation in AC and we're trading blows? Is that not also a DPS race? To use this term is an appeal to emotion, and we'll cover that in more detail next. But it is being used to misrepresent the argument. People just say it without understanding it. So let me explain it to you, and to the people who use it, so we can all understand. The reason why people are calling things a DPS race now is because of the auto-aim of the weapons. Not the speed, not master modes, or anything else, but the auto-aim.
I think they're also using that because it's hard to escape face-to-face fighting. You know, like at the moment, a lot of the feedback from the sweatier community, I guess, is like, let's try to incorporate pushing and get more positional combat, kind of like jiu-jitsu wrestling, for example, like a wrestling of these ships in space. And a lot of the complaints with master modes is that it's hard to push or create geometry. And so it's a lot of the time face-to-face DPS racing or just brawling face-to-face. So I think that's the kind of what they're describing there when they talk about it being just a DPS race. I think at least that's what I'm referring to when I use the term.
It is too easy to aim, and that is true. I truly believe it's
not
true.
It's pretty difficult in a light fighter, guys. Like aiming, the nose is very wobbly. You know, between ESP, uneven pitch yaw, you know, the boosters, the smoothness of the booster and the transition of flight, going up against these, you know, walls all of a sudden, stuff like that is creating a really bouncy, wobbly feeling at the nose. So, you know, is the aim assist high? Yeah, it is, but the aiming experience is quite difficult in the smaller fighters. It's definitely easier in the bigger fighters, but it is an issue.
I'd like to clarify that it is too hard to hit, which is ironic, but I already covered that topic in my previous video. But it is also a result of a game where combat happens in space, where two ships have shields, hull HP, and depleting those two things is required to win the race. That's it. You don't have a DPS race in War Thunder because one burst from a gun is usually enough to destroy your opponent. That isn't the case in a game like Star Citizen. The DPS race, as they call it, has always been present and will always be present.
It's kind of like that bullet sponge term people use, right?
Perhaps armor will fix it? Maybe, at least for the bigger ships.
And people refer to that like the DPS race because the TTK, the time to kill, is really high. Like it takes a long time to kill someone. So it's kind of what they feel like. It's just a race to kill someone because you know, it's a lengthy process now.
But as long as the end goal is to shoot
And
your
it's
enemy
might
ship
not be
until
as
it is
interesting
destroyed,
experience
that will always be the
because
case.
it's so long.
The longer the time to kill, the more of a DPS race things become.
Ah,
In
beat him to it.
MMORPG raids, used to have a hit chance to help mitigate that and prolong the race. In FPS games, you have accuracy to control and cover to utilize. In Surge-Resistant flight combat, at least for light fighters, it has always been a DPS race. And the only thing that was mitigating it before was absurd combat speeds and obnoxious abuse of mechanics to manipulate the pip in such a way that made accurate fire difficult.
it's true.
That wasn't fun,
That is such a
or
base
was it a good
take.
system to design and
Holy
build around.
moly, that's based. It's
There
true.
really is no magic solution
It's the ugly
either.
truth people don't
If
want to
you make
talk
ships
about.
explode very quickly,
But I don't think anyone is like extremely pro live, right? But you know, they all want, you know, like what was in the past, or they all want better geometry, you know, cool flight styles, stuff like that. But that is the reality of what we're experiencing in live right now. The best players feel the most broken. Like that's the sensation you get. Is, wow, that guy's good because my game breaks when I fight that guy. That is a very common occurrence. Extremely common.
you'd have a game of who shoots first. If you have a game where weak spots are the only way to do damage, then it becomes a game of who moves the fastest. But for all the gripes and complaints about the current Master Mode being a DPS race, I would take that over any of the aforementioned alternatives. Lately, you may have noticed this tactic being used quite a bit, with some individuals referring to SC as an arcade game now, or even comparing it to mobile phone games. The reason people say this is because they want to evoke an emotion from you. They lack a real argument, unable to back it with logical reasoning. They cannot logically explain why they have chosen those words, but they use them because they want you to view the changes coming as an oversimplification or trivialization of the product. Master Modes is certainly a change, and a very big one. But it isn't being done to turn this game into
Look at who is trolling him. Someone's put in his ship. Guys, I told you to leave him alone.
It isn't even remotely close to that. Nor is it even close to Elite Dangerous. It is still uniquely Star Citizen.
Is this
And
Steed?
that has not changed. No matter what people are trying to get you to believe, you still have 6 degrees of freedom, you still have seamless transitions between space and atmospheric combat, and you still have all of the fidelity, glitz, and glamour that you have come to expect from CIG. It's just all being presented to you in a different way.
Like, is Master Modes arcadey? I would argue that when people say that Master Modes is arcadey, that means that Master Modes makes sense. Because when other video games make, or when other developers make a spaceship or a dogfighting game of any type, it has to make sense. It has to work, right? Like, players need to be able to kill each other. Players need to be able to run, but not easily. The game needs to function when you're trying to shoot at another spaceship or vehicle, whatever. So does that just mean it's arcadey? You know, so, or does arcadey just mean it's too simplistic? Because if they're just referring to it being too simplistic, I would agree. It needs more depth, but there was inevitably going to be a lot of depth coming. So, you know, I can understand why people are calling it that, and I'm on your team as well. And I can understand why people think that arcade is good, because that means it makes sense. It works as you would expect it to work. You know, they refer, when they talk about arcade, they talk about other games. Well, other games made it work. You know, but I'm on both sides here, guys. Like, I don't want people to think I'm not for having a high skill game and depth and complexity, because I am absolutely pushing that. But I am definitely pushing that on top of the Master Modes framework. So I'm on both sides there.
I'm growing weary of people using the word accessible as a pejorative. It doesn't imply dumbing something down to reader rabbit levels, which, by the way, I think some of the people in my comments could benefit from playing. Rather, it means opening up access.
Yo, I need to start reading the comments in this guy's video. Is he just like... Is he getting attacked in the comments? I'm starting to feel like he's got a disdain for the people in his comments. Dude, I love his videos when he's like this, man. It's so good.
To be part of the game, which players previously thought was locked off to them due to the prohibitively high barrier of entry.
It's like a love-hate relationship with his viewers.
A prohibitive amount of time to really play and get into. Adding on the expectation for players to quote-unquote train and quote-unquote practice in a completely separate minigame outside of the PU, and hopefully someday MMO, is unrealistic and unappealing.
If you want to push it that far, you can push it. It just shouldn't be mandatory to push it that far, right? And there shouldn't be a gigantic, Mount Everest size difference between the people who are doing that and the people who aren't. But let people push it as far as they want to push it, I think. Like having content creators creating content on how to manage a constellation with your team of engineers and your turrets and stuff like that. Having depth and being able to create content, I thought would be something Buzz would, probably enjoy. I imagine he does. I might be misinterpreting this, but depth is good. It is. Creating content is cool. Getting friends together, making your org appeal to an audience because you provide training programs. I think depth like that is a good thing. It just doesn't have to come at the cost of ruining PvP or extremely imbalancing PvP. There's a middle ground. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a middle ground between all of us. And we should try to incorporate what we all want out of it so that we're all happy without us dragging down what someone else wants from the game, right? The guys who multi-crew are in capital ships or in the massive multi-crew ships, the hammerheads and stuff, they shouldn't be obliterating everything on the board. And it's the same for the light fighters. So we should all be happy. We should all get what we want. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask for.
2000s anymore. People have
like I said in my last video, buff everything. Don't nerf the bad things. Buff everything up to standard. Buff everything to include everybody. Buffs over debuffs, boys.
Myriad of games to play at any time. They have options. If Star Citizen is asking too much in terms of time for practice outside of the real game, they're just going to go play something else. And you may say, well, they don't have to train. But the reality is that they do. That is what AC is for. AC has created an environment that almost demands that players use it to train and hone their skills for the real thing. And this keeps them out of the real thing and in training. Sooner or later, that reality is going to hit them. And they're either going to stop and accept their fate within the PU or go do something else with their time. This is why the system must not require a training regime to be competent at.
Yeah, and that's the key to this, right? To be competent. You should need to train to become a master, okay? To get the black belt, right? But you shouldn't need to train excessively with watching, an entire video series or joining a training academy, a flight academy, just to learn how to turn on your ship, for example, or to be an average, good enough pilot. So we want the skill floor to come down so that everyone can play and get into it. But we want the game to be enjoyable for a long period of time and have a high skill ceiling. But that high skill ceiling doesn't have to come at the cost of everybody that hasn't reached it dying by the hundreds, right? Like, just a good balance. To be very skilled at the game and to be extremely... to have mastered, the archetype that you're flying, it shouldn't mean that you're just, slaying people by the dozens. I love the idea that a skilled pilot could go up against its weight class and maybe take on 3 opponents if we're talking about a master. But And that's kind of where the balance I'd leave it. But I don't want like 1v10s happening. I don't want 1v5s happening. I don't want it anymore. Like, and that might be an unpopular opinion in the PvP community. I don't know. But, I want the game to include everybody. The more people that is PvPing, the more people with bases attacking each other, alliances, organizations existing, it's good. Let it encompass all. Buzz is right here. And I think a little bit wrong too. Let's just include everything. Have it all. There's a middle ground somewhere.
That is the key word here, by the way. Competent. Not expert, not pro, not the best. Competent. I've always found the notion of training for a computer game ridiculous. I've never spent time in AIM Labs or whatever other consumer-driven software marketed at making me better at games that people peddle now. I've just played them. Ideally, players will just play the MMO portion of Star Citizen and get better at it.
I think that will happen though. Like, I think that these training, sessions happen, these videos happen because it's so hard to learn because the PvP doesn't work in live. Like, the speeds are so ridiculous, they're so high that, it's hard to create that organically. It's hard to just PvP in the game because it's so broken. People don't know what they're doing, and so it breaks. And the people that know what they're doing break it intentionally anyway. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that Buzz will get his. I think training will happen subconsciously with people when the PvP works. I think master modes will create people that will be masters and really good without an ounce of training. Even if the skill ceiling gets higher. Because that's all AC is, right? AC is just a frequency of fights. You go into AC, you're going to have, in an hour, the same amount of combat you would have had in 5 hours in the PU. That's the only difference. And there's some things in AC that you cannot learn without going into the PU. So keep that in mind too. There's often been periods where AC players come into the PU and they learn that it is a different game and that they are not well equipped, or they don't know those lessons from the PU, and vice versa the other way around.
What MMO do you know of where people train in a separate minigame to do the content they prefer? Do target dummies and RPGs count? Does running the same static, never-changing scripted PvE dungeon count? What requires it? This is a genuine question. When I played Planetside, Dark Age of Camelot, or even garbage WoW arenas and RPGs, I never trained for them. I just played the game. It was organic and fun.
Yep.
Sitting in AC all day to train for the real thing has put me in an endless loop of training. I think if you've seen me in Star Marine, you could attest that
it just should be like competent, right? Like, you shouldn't need training to be competent
in the PU, not the Star Marine minigame. And that is why I'm telling you accessibility is important for this product. Because if I, a sweaty in my own right, don't enjoy it, Joe Casual, of which there are far more than me, isn't going to enjoy it either. I want light fighters to remain a viable playstyle, but it just doesn't suit me. However, the reason some people advocate for the bigger is better argument is because, for the first time in a while, they have a chance of being engaged and destroyed. Unfortunately, this isn't the case for ships like the Hammerhead or its turrets, or any turrets for that matter. They're lacking. But ships like the Connie and Vanguard are fully capable of delivering a blow if they make a mistake. And why is that an issue again? It's difficult for me to sympathize with light fighter players when they've been the sole option for so long.
Yeah, that's true.
But, believe it or not, I want them to enjoy the game too.
Oh, look, he's coming around
to the bigger picture, but not at the expense of larger and, yes, more effective ships. Please explain to me why you,
it's reasonable,
a pilot in a light fighter, should be able to take down a fully crewed Constellation? Why? Through skill? Do you genuinely believe that crewing and operating those ships don't require skill? Let me tell you, dealing with the atrocious UI, ineffective turrets, and the Gladius' insane strafe speeds, that demands a considerable amount of skill just to take down one.
And we learned that if you launch 2 size 1 missiles, If you launch 2 size 1 missiles at Buzzcut, for some reason it just turns off his Andromeda. And now I can only think of that last video. Yo, he's right.
Of you.
Dude, the last video I reacted to of his, he was just getting tormented.
I've come across numerous posts where players audaciously suggest that multi-crew ships are currently in good condition. They often cite the effectiveness of the Constellation and Master modes as evidence. Is the Connie effective? Absolutely. If you recklessly fly directly in front of its guns. Otherwise, it's constantly flanked and ultimately destroyed. And that's acceptable. Yes, that's acceptable. A Connie without gunners should undoubtedly be vulnerable to a smaller ship sneaking up behind it and taking it out.
Am I the only one that feels like Buzzcut is on base? He's discovered the baseline. I find myself agreeing more and more now. This is great. This is what all these videos that everybody is spamming, myself included, master modes, we're finding a common ground. This is good. So good. I love it. I love it.
Concern arises when crewed. The turrets struggle to effectively target the fighters harassing it. Thus, it becomes more practical to bring 2 additional Connies to cover each other instead of having 2 gunners. That's not what I want to see from these ships. I want to see teamwork encouraged and rewarded, with players having an incentive to man these turrets, not just bring more ships and fly them solo. I view players flying Connie solo in the same light as individuals taking tanks and squad and operating them alone. That's imprudent. I'm not suggesting you should be obligated to have a crew, but if light fighter pilots are reckless enough to fly in front of the Connie and end up as wreckage, that's on them, and not indicative of multi-crew ships being in good condition.
You could do interesting things, right? You could make like engineering, meaning like the co-pilot or anyone in engineering are the players that are responsible for shield face, shield allocation, strengthening shields, things like this. You could take, the Idris's railgun and make it dependent on a co-pilot or something like that. But you could shift some of the responsibilities, maybe the proactive buffs that people get inside of multi-crew, and spread those responsibilities out to the ship so that when you do solo pilot, you are considerably weaker than a multi-crewed ship. Because that's the truth. A meta that evolved in live is that a group of 15 gets 15 hammerheads, and they just use the insane missile payloads on all of those ships, and it's just unapproachable. Because the moment you fly up to a group of 15 hammerheads that are all solo piloted, only 15 players, which could maybe crew 2 hammerheads, design intent wise, you're just getting swarmed by missiles. It's unapproachable. So I do think we have an issue where we are giving the pilot of these larger ships way too much responsibility and power, and the rest of the crew doesn't have enough responsibility and power. So I think he's very on base here. I think this is an issue long-term for the future.
I've said it before, and I'll reiterate. We need to promote and reward players for utilizing these larger ships. Now, let's consider if you crew those ships. What kind of player believes that they, as a light fighter, should ever pose a threat to a larger class of ship? A delusional one. Someone so self-absorbed in their perceived greatness that they can't comprehend being outmatched by something else.
I like the idea of like escalation in Eve, for example. Like the lights take on the lights, the heavies take on the heavy fighters, larger multi-crew ships take on the larger multi-crew ships, the capitals take on the capitals. Do I think that you should be able to fight above your weight class? Yes, in numbers. Like if a hammerhead is to be multi-crewed by 10 players, X amount in engineering, pilot, co-pilot, and all the turrets, then I would want it to take like maybe 12 to 15 light fighters that are in the weaker archetype in this scenario, because this is paper rock scenario, right? I'd want it to take a healthy amount of gladiuses around the 15 mark to take it out, because it's a counter. The hammerhead is a counter to light fighters, as described. So, I like the idea of, oh man, this group is running really heavy. They've got Idrises, they've got Constellation, Andromedas, they've got some heavy fighters and a large light fighter wing. So I want the idea that, okay, we need to prepare counters for this, and then our lights will go at them, you know, like their lights. You know, I want, you know, like, yeah, weight divisions and requirements to punch above your weight, etc., and requirements to operate heavy weighted ships.
Not every light fighter pilot fits this description, and many of the exceptional pilots I've conversed with on Discord over the past few days, particularly one who knows their identity, understand that this isn't directed at them. However, there's a small yet vocal group of players who vehemently oppose the idea that anything other than a light fighter should be a viable option in any PvP encounter. I've always been in favor of master modes and still am. As per my previous video, version 3.22.1 really misses the mark.
Someone stole his wrench. Wait, look, see ya.
Really misses the mark and brings back many problems the legacy flight model had. Speed is always a point of contention, but throughout Star Citizen's history, speed was never as high as it was prior to master modes. And I truly believe the speeds they have now in 3.22.1 are mostly fine. Acceleration and strafe are likely the culprits for many of the problems we are seeing, and I would like to see them considered. Accessibility is one of the core goals of master modes, and anyone who thinks otherwise is misguided and not worth listening to. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I would really like all of you to get in there and try out master modes.
Man, another great video. Another great one. He's easing up on the light fighter hate, guys. So that's great. You know, I think he's getting closer to baseline. I think we all are getting closer to baseline. I have definitely found myself more understanding of multi-crew and the frustrations of flying a bigger ship. And yeah, I think he is right about a good healthy amount of this, probably wrong about a small amount of this, but this felt pretty close to baseline in my opinion. But it's important to, and one thing I do disagree with him on is I think we can all have what we want as long as we're all being reasonable, you know, and it's not coming at the expense of each other. That's the big one for me, right? Light fighters can be fun, they can be agile, they can be strong, but they can't be too strong, you know, and other ships, other archetypes, other types of playing the game should also be capable of being very strong. Training should exist if people want it to exist, and it shouldn't be a requirement. You know, it shouldn't come at the expense of each other, but we can all live in the holy promised land that is master modes. Okay? That's my take. I'm a big fan of all these content creators making master modes content. I'm a big fan of everybody testing it out. Big fan of all the new faces that are coming to PvP. It's great to see. I cannot wait to see more organizations form. I cannot wait to see more groups get into trouble, to see some org drama, you know, some wars happen, alliances, trade deals. I can't wait for more people to get involved in the game to get fleshed out. And I'm excited for more people to get into PvP. So my take from this is I believe we can all coexist and we can all have what we want. I think we can all be happy with this. And there's a middle ground. So what did you guys think? You know, was he on base with this? Am I being on base? Have I stretched a React video out far too long? I'm sorry. I'm passionate about it, boys. Okay, like if I'm invested in the topic, it's going to be a pause fest. I apologize. If you got here, you know what to type. Those 3 magic numbers that make my day, okay? 1, 2, then 3. But man, I really liked the video. How do you guys feel? Do you think it's too arcadey? What do you want from master modes since you've played it? Yeah, like what do you feel like it's lacking? Really looking forward to reading the comments as always. Buzz, thank you for the video. Everybody, thank you for their videos. Awesome, good, fun. I'll catch you guys in the next one, yeah? GG's, GG's.